Nebraska faces Northwestern October 25th, 2025 at 11 a.m. Is this the most important game of Matt Rhule's tenure so far? Yes, it is. I don't think it's really close. It's year three. It's year three. And we last week about this time, I think that I was ready anyway to start getting over the PTSD that I've had for years about Nebraska football. And I felt like going into the Minnesota game that, yes, we should win because I think we're a more talented team and a better team. And then we went up there and got our asses kicked. Minnesota decided to come and play football in Nebraska. According to players and coaches during this Monday's pressers, let's see, Luke Lindenmeyer said, and I like Luke Lindenmeyer. I think he plays hard. He certainly looked like he was playing hard throughout the game Friday night. He said that Nebraska went up there to put on a show and then had to actually play football and got their asses kicked because they weren't ready to play football. Matt Rhule came out in his Monday presser and said that he couldn't convince his assistants to take the game seriously. And one of them said that they were upset that he kept crowning Minnesota. Well, wow, that really worked out poorly. And then, the backlash, you have this interesting going back and forth with the backlash. There's Friday night, and after that, the fallout from the game is people have this idea that Nebraska's not going to win another game this season, which, you know what, could be true. If they play like they did against Minnesota, they're not going to win another game this season. They play like they did against other teams, maybe they got a shot of winning a few more. I think most people predicted them at 8-4 or 9-3. I predicted 10-2, so I think that's out of the question. But it's still in the picture. The thing is people were feeling pretty bad about it, and I think that's kind of justified. Maybe not the complete meltdown and we're not going to win another game, but feeling good about Nebraska football and then watch them basically give up about late in the third quarter. That's how I felt, was that they pretty much walked out the rest of the game. And I felt like Minnesota did that too. I felt like Minnesota looked at them and said, well, you're beaten, so we'll just kind of, we'll make attempts at running the offense and we won't just beat the shit out of you even more, even though they could. They could have scored 40, probably, if they really wanted to. That's how I felt about watching the game. And now you have like media members of Nebraska coming out and saying, well, you need to stop this whiplash. You need to stop this whiplash, get off this roller coaster. And I find that well, first of all, there is one way to get off the Nebraska roller coaster, and that's by you just stop being a fan and stop paying attention. And I can understand why a lot of people would be doing that. They could put it this way. I spent $1,800 on tickets to go to the Nebraska-Minnesota game. I had an entourage, and it was an enjoyable event, except for the losing, which was a lot. Few people enjoyed it a lot more than I did. But let me explain to you something about being media. Okay? I'm media when it's convenient for me. I'm media when I want to be on their side, and I'm not media when I want to be on the fan side. So it's pretty convenient. I'm being open and honest about that. But let me explain to you about how it is being media. They don't have to worry about buying tickets. They don't have to worry about parking. Typically, you do at the University of Minnesota, but most not other places, certainly not at Nebraska, usually get parking tickets. You don't have to worry about dealing with crowds because typically you go before there's anybody else there and you leave after everybody else is long gone. You don't sit in a parking lot waiting to get out. You don't typically have to worry about concessions or lines to bathrooms, things like that. All the other stuff that fans have to worry about. You don't have to be smashed in a seat like you do in South Memorial Stadium, with people sitting on top of each other. So when it comes to being a media person covering these games, it's pretty damned easy. The press boxes are quiet. If you're on the field, you're still not dealing with media. You're not dealing with other people around you bugging you. It's pretty easy. And now, to defend the media, see, I'll be media for a moment. To defend the media, they have to constantly deal with a lot of negative comments, and coming from a fan's perspective, you leave one negative comment, but for example, on videos or on articles I write, I might get tons of negative comments. From your perspective, you left one. From my perspective, I see a crap ton. Apparently, somebody on Reddit last week, somebody sent me this, said that whenever they see my face, I just close the article, which is, if you have followers, you have anti-followers also. That goes with the territory. The other thing I'm going back to being a fan again. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that a lot of these people are the same people that watched Scott Frost burn the program to the ground and didn't say a damn thing ever about it, really, other than, well, goodbye. And now back to being a fan. Why don't they ever ask any hard questions like, when are you going to fire your offensive line coach? I think there is some fear of losing your credential. That's not the case at Nebraska. Nebraska is very good about dealing with people doing all sorts of things without being really vindictive about it. They've always been very good at that. They run a very good athletic department in that manner. But it is, I would imagine, if you're asking that and then you have to interview that coach later, it's pretty uncomfortable situation. And they probably don't want to ask that question and then have to deal with, I want to ask that coach questions, and he's not going to give them anything because they just asked about, when are you going to fire that son of a bitch anyway? I don't deal with that because I typically don't interview anybody that I'm going to have to deal with face to face. I welcome it. If anyone wants to come talk to me about what I think about their coaching, I'm all ears. But that's the perspective, There's a lot of gatekeeping going on with Nebraska football. Let's move on to Nebraska versus Northwestern. It's the most important game in Matt Rhule's tenure so far because it's year 3. We were promised or told all sorts of things about Matt Rhule's magic year 3. And if Nebraska goes into this game like they went into the last one, they're going to lose. If they don't take this game seriously, it's a loss. And at that point, I can imagine that 80% of the fan base will say, the hell with this. They'll still show up, but their hearts won't be in it at all. Northwestern, Northwestern's not really anything special. They're 5-2, though. Why? Because, why? It's because Northwestern is perfectly content with having games that we hate. They're perfectly content, they always have been, into getting you into a rock fight and then just beating you up and having a chance to win the game at the end. And because you're getting in, I don't know if you've ever been in a rock fight, but they hurt a lot. And you're like, why are you throwing rocks at me, you son of a bitch? And then you get all discombobulated. Because, rocks, clods, anything getting thrown at you, they hurt a lot. And you're all, you mentally, you just go off the deep end. And that's what Northwestern likes to do to people. They're perfectly fine trudging out games and winning with a field goal at the end. We've seen that evident at Nebraska Northwestern, the battle for NU, over and over and over throughout the years now. Let's look at some stats real quick. What does Northwestern do? Well, they run you into the ground. Let's look at scoring offense. I think they score about 22.5 points a game. Nationally, that makes them 101st. But in scoring defense, they give up 15 points a game. And they're 11th. So a good prediction for this game, Nebraska versus Northwestern, would be Nebraska 15, Northwestern 22, because that's what you would expect if you're on the Northwestern side of the fence. You can expect Northwestern to run the ball a lot. Now let's look at their rushing offense real quick. They're 39th in rushing offense with 190 yards a game. That's not really incredibly good, but you look at Nebraska, and we're 105th with 125 yards a game. That number should be way up. Rushing defense, Northwestern's at 56th in rushing defense, and Nebraska is at 86th, giving up 156 yards a game. Just about what Northwestern rushes for. Passing offense for Northwestern, they're going to be very low. 115th, giving up 174 yards a game. Wow, it seems like we should be able to take advantage of their pass defense and then throw the ball which is going to be an interesting game to watch. Is how does Dylan Raiola react to his last game where he just held the ball and gave up 9 sacks, not all his fault, or the offensive line that played like not a very good offensive line that's being nice, and see what happens there. I guess that's what we're all going to watch and see what happens with Nebraska's offensive line and Dylan Raiola on offense. If you were Nebraska, you'd feed Emmett Johnson quite a bit more than you did last week. You'd also make sure to have some crossing routes or some mesh routes or things like that. Slants, maybe. Do we have a slant where the ball comes out quick and we have a designated target? Bread and butter kind of plays in the pass game where we know what's going to happen. Stick routes where Luke Lindemeyer just goes out 6 yards and waits in the middle of a zone or waits. It's a timing route. Bam, hit him. That's it. 6-yard gain. Stuff where Dylan Raiola can get comfortable with being in the pocket instead of feeling like he's going to die at any moment. What do we expect out of this game? I expect Nebraska to show up with some fire. I expect them to show up pissed off. I expect this to win by more than 10 points. I expect this to beat the shit out of Northwestern physically. I don't know if that's possible, but I expect it to happen. Because if you're going to have any hope in this team this year, this is the time to show it. I do think that Matt Rhule I want him to be successful. I want him to be Nebraska's coach. I think that he's very good with the media. I think he's an excellent ambassador for the University of Nebraska, and God knows we need one. And I know that we have him on volleyball, in football, because people pay a lot more attention to that. I want him to be the guy that's successful because I'm really tired of starting over. And I do think he can do that, but he's going to have to make some changes. And I do think it's important to see how Nebraska comes out against Northwestern this week. No tree, no outdoors right now because, I have a heavy schedule, so it's easier to do this in my office and get it out. So let me know your thoughts about the game. Let me know if you're still paying attention to Nebraska football, how it's going for you. And, I hope you're having a good week. And thank you all for support. Love you very much. John, go Big Red.